You know South Carolina for its beaches, its sweet tea, its college football rivalries, and its stretch of coastline that millions of people drive to every summer without looking left or right. It's a state that knows how to present itself: warm, welcoming, beautiful. But underneath that surface, underneath the palmetto trees and the Spanish moss and the resort hotels, there's another South Carolina, one that the highway signs don't point to. Towns that were burned in a war and never rebuilt. Towns that were drowned by the government on purpose. Towns that were erased so completely that all that's left is a road marker in the grass and the memory of people who once called them home. In this video, we're going to 9 abandoned places in South Carolina that most people drive past, fly over, or never think about at all. Some are older than the United States itself. One was destroyed to build the most destructive weapon in human history. And the one we're saving for last was the most radical act of self-determination in American history, and almost nobody knows it ever existed. Subscribe. Let's go find them. Number 9. Colonial Dorchester, Dorchester County. The town that survived a war and then abandoned itself. About 18 miles north of Charleston, tucked inside a 325-acre state park that most locals have never visited, lie the ruins of one of the oldest English-speaking settlements in South Carolina. Dorchester was founded in 1697, not by frontiersmen or gold seekers, but by a group of Puritan Congregationalists who sailed down from Dorchester, Massachusetts, looking for new land along the Ashley River. They named their new home after the town they'd left, after the town in England they'd come from before that. The name traveled across an ocean and down a coastline, and it planted itself in the Carolina Low Country, 15 miles from what would become the city of Charleston. For 80 years, Dorchester was a real town. By 1770, it had 40 homes, a school, a library, a monthly fair, and a church. A tabby fort built from oyster shells, lime, and sand guarded a strategic bend in the Ashley River. Lumber, tar, rice, and indigo moved through its wharves. It was a functioning piece of colonial civilization in the American South, ordinary in the best sense of the word. Then the Revolutionary War started. American militia garrisoned the fort. The British took it in 1780, held it for a year, and when they finally left in 1781, they burned the town on their way out. Most of the remaining residents scattered to nearby Somerville, to Georgia, to wherever the roads led. By 1788, Dorchester was completely empty. And then the forest grew over it. For 100 years, the ruins of Dorchester sat under a canopy of trees while the surrounding world changed completely. The Great Charleston Earthquake of 1886, one of the most powerful earthquakes in the history of the eastern United States, hit less than a mile from the old town and destroyed most of what remained. Almost everything was gone. What's left today? A single brick bell tower from St. George's Anglican Church, built in 1751, rising from the ground with nothing attached to it anymore. The walls of the Tabby Fort still standing after 265 years. A partial log wharf visible at low tide in the Ashley River. Archaeologists still dig here. They are still finding things, still uncovering the remnants of ordinary life in a town that ended so abruptly that even the history left evidence behind. Number 8. Ferguson, Orangeburg County, the lumber town at the bottom of a lake. Pull up Lake Marion on a map, the largest lake in South Carolina, stretching across Orangeburg and Clarendon counties, and it looks like it's always been there. It hasn't. The lake was created in 1941 when the Santee Dam was built, flooding 160,000 acres of the Santee River Valley. And somewhere under that water, if you know where to look, is what's left of Ferguson. Ferguson started in the early 1900s when 2 businessmen from Chicago, Francis Beadler and Benjamin Franklin Ferguson, purchased 160,000 acres of cypress forest along the Santee River and built a massive lumber mill. A full company town grew around it, a church, a hotel, a school, a railroad line to carry the timber out. Ferguson was entirely owned by its Chicago investors, and it ran entirely on their terms. Workers were paid in company scrip, currency that couldn't be spent anywhere but the company store. When they eventually realized what was happening, they left. Without workers, the mill shut down. Without the mill, Ferguson had no reason to exist. When the Santee Dam rose and the waters of Lake Marion crept in, the abandoned ruins of Ferguson went under. Today, you can reach the site by canoe or kayak. One of the old brick kilns still juts above the waterline, a chimney rising from the lake surface with nothing around it but water and silence. During the drought of the early 2010s, when lake levels dropped dramatically, people could actually walk to the site and stand on the dried lake bed where Ferguson's streets once ran. Then the rains returned and it sank again. Ferguson surfaces and disappears on its own timeline, just like it always did. Number 8. Andersonville, Anderson County. The town Lake Hartwell swallowed. Not far from the Georgia state line, in the hills of upstate South Carolina, another entire community went underwater. This one deliberately flooded when Lake Hartwell was created in the 1950s. Andersonville was established in 1801 along the Seneca River. It was a textile community that knew how to absorb punishment. A catastrophic flood in 1840 destroyed most of its mills. The community rebuilt. Less than 12 years later, another flood destroyed them again. Still, the people stayed. The mills went up. Andersonville held on for another 100 years. Then the federal government decided it needed a reservoir. Lake Hartwell was planned as a flood control and recreation project, and Andersonville's location put it directly in the path of the rising water. Residents were displaced. The town was surrendered. The lake filled. Today, Andersonville sits at the bottom of Lake Hartwell, accessible only by boat. A silent underwater landscape of foundations and streets that kayakers paddle over without knowing what's beneath them. The same floods that tried to destroy Andersonville in 1840 and 1852 ultimately won, just not in the way anyone expected. Number 6. HAPPYVILLE, Aiken County. The socialist farm colony nobody talks about. Here is a South Carolina ghost town that almost no one has heard of, and the reason it's forgotten is almost as strange as the reason it was built. In 1905, the South Carolina Department of Agriculture had a plan. They wanted to bring Eastern European Jewish immigrants to the state to work as farmers, specifically to replace black farm workers whom state officials considered less desirable. The program was openly racist in its design. A small agricultural commune called HAPPYVILLE was established near Aiken, funded by the state and populated by Jewish immigrants recruited from the tenement neighborhoods of New York City. The experiment lasted less than 3 years. South Carolina farmland bore no resemblance to anything the immigrants had ever worked. The weather was brutal in ways they hadn't anticipated. The racist underpinnings of the program created a hostile surrounding community, and the whole concept, a state-sponsored socialist commune in the Jim Crow South, was built on contradictions too deep to survive. By 1908, HAPPYVILLE was empty. Today, almost nothing remains. It sits as a strange, largely forgotten footnote, a place where two of the ugliest forces in American history, racism and exploitation, collided in a way that produced nothing but failure and silence. Number 5. MERRITTSVILLE, Greenville County, the dark corner town under the reservoir. In the mountains of upstate South Carolina, in a region historically known as the Dark Corner, named for its reputation for moonshining and violence and its general indifference to outside authority, there was once a small stagecoach town called MERRITTSVILLE, named after a man named Benjamin Merritt, who settled here in the early 1800s. MERRITTSVILLE sat at a crossroads in northern Greenville County, a stopping point for travelers moving through the rugged mountain country near the North Carolina border. It had a general store, a church, a blacksmith, the quiet infrastructure of a place that served the surrounding community without ever getting big enough to be important. Then Greenville needed water. The Greenville Watershed Project in the early 20th century turned the streams and valleys of the Dark Corner into a reservoir system for the city below. MERRITTSVILLE was directly in the path of the rising water. Residents were bought out or relocated. The town was flooded. The moonshiner country of the Dark Corner, already suspicious of government and outsiders, lost another piece of its identity to the needs of a city it had never trusted. Today, MERRITTSVILLE lies under the Greenville Watershed Reservoir, its history preserved mainly in county records and the memories of descendants who still live in the surrounding hills. The Dark Corner kept its name, but the town at its edge is gone. Number 4. Fort Motte, Calhoun County, the plantation that became a battlefield that became nothing. If this video is hitting different than you expected, smash that like button and subscribe, because the last 3 entries on this list are something else entirely. In May of 1781, the American Revolution was still being fought in the swamps and hills of South Carolina. A Continental officer named Lieutenant Colonel Henry Lee approached a British garrison that had occupied the plantation home of a widow named Rebecca Mott. The British had fortified the house on a hill overlooking the Congaree River. Lee needed to take it. Rebecca Mott herself handed Lee and his officers a bow and a set of fire arrows tipped with combustible material, and told them to burn her house down. She understood what the war required. She understood what her house was worth compared to what was at stake. The house burned. The British surrendered. The siege of Fort Motte lasted less than a day. When the war ended, there was no reason to rebuild the fortified settlement. The plantation's economy, like so many in the post-revolutionary South, struggled and changed. The population drifted away. By the mid-1800s, Fort Motte existed mostly as a name on a road and a memory of what had happened on the hill above the Congaree. Today, a historical marker stands where Rebecca Mott's house once burned. The hill overlooking the river is still there. The story of a widow handing soldiers the tools to destroy her own home for the sake of a country that was still being invented is one of the most extraordinary acts in South Carolina's revolutionary history. Almost nobody stops to look. Number 3. Mitchellville, Hilton Head Island. The town that invented freedom before the law did. Here is the most important ghost town in South Carolina, possibly one of the most important ghost towns in America, and it sits on one of the most expensive resort islands on the East Coast, where millions of tourists arrive every year to play golf and eat seafood and never ask what came before. On November 7, 1861, less than a year into the Civil War, Union forces captured Hilton Head Island in one of the first major naval engagements of the war. The Confederate planters fled. They took as many enslaved people as they could carry. But thousands of enslaved people were left behind, freed by the chaos of occupation, and the Union Army had no plan for what to do with them. By 1862, over 10,000 formerly enslaved people were living in makeshift camps on the island, in conditions the Union military admitted were overcrowded and dangerous. Then a Union general named Ormsby Mitchell arrived and proposed something nobody had ever tried in America: build a real town. Let the freed people govern themselves. What rose in the cotton field on the old Drayton plantation, built by the freed people themselves, using timber provided by the Union Army, was Mitchellville. And what happened in Mitchellville between 1862 and the mid-1870s was nothing less than revolutionary. The town had elected officials, a mayor and a council, chosen by its residents. It had courts. It had organized trash collection. It had 4 churches and 4 schools. And it had something that no place in the South, and very few places anywhere in America, had ever enacted: compulsory education. Children ages 6 to 15 were required by law to attend school. This was the first mandatory school attendance law in South Carolina history. It was enacted by a community of people who had spent their entire lives being denied the right to read. Harriet Tubman walked these streets. At its height, Mitchellville had up to 3,000 residents. And it was built, governed, and sustained entirely by people who had been legally defined as property less than a year before. General Mitchell himself died 6 weeks after arriving on the island from yellow fever. He never saw what his order had created. The town was named for him posthumously, and the people he had directed to build it built something he never imagined. After the war, the Union Army left. Freed people began drifting to other opportunities. The Drayton heirs returned and reclaimed the plantation land, leaving the Mitchellville residents without legal protection for their homes. A hurricane in 1893 destroyed most of what remained. By 1990, the town had been largely abandoned. Today, on a 36-acre parcel near Hilton Head Airport, a small park marks what was Mitchellville. None of the original buildings survived. Steel frames outline where the houses stood. Archaeologists dig for what the ground remembers. A $22.8 million restoration project is underway, which means that more than 160 years after it was built, someone is finally deciding that Mitchellville's story deserves to be told. It was the first self-governed town of freed people in the United States. It invented compulsory education for black children in the South while the Civil War was still being fought, and almost no one learns its name in any history class in America. Number 2. Dunbarton, Barnwell County. The town the Cold War erased. When Ellenton was destroyed to make room for the hydrogen bomb plant, which we'll get to in a moment, it wasn't alone. Its smaller neighbor, Dunbarton, died the same week, the same way, for the same reason. Dunbarton was a quiet farming community, smaller than Ellenton, less documented, less remembered. It didn't have Ellenton's history or its community records. It had families, it had farms, it had people who had lived in the same place for generations. On November 28, 1950, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission announced that 300 square miles of Aiken and Barnwell County would be seized for the Savannah River plant. Dunbarton was inside that boundary. Within 15 months, every resident had left. The buildings were demolished. The land was absorbed into a nuclear weapons facility. Today, Dunbarton exists only in family memory and county records. There is no marker. There is nothing to see. The site is inside a federally controlled nuclear facility. You cannot visit it. It was not just abandoned, it was erased. Number 1. Ellenton, Aiken County. The town they destroyed to build the bomb. At noon on November 28, 1950, residents of Ellenton, South Carolina gathered around their radios. They'd known for weeks that something was coming. Government surveyors had been moving through the county months before, testing soil, placing numbered tags on buildings, studying maps. The rumors had been wild. A new industry? A military base? What they heard was this. President Truman, alarmed by the Soviet Union's growing nuclear capability and the specter of World War III, had approved the construction of the Savannah River plant, a facility to produce plutonium and tritium for hydrogen bombs. It would require 300 square miles of protected land. That land was here, in Aiken and Barnwell counties, where Ellenton stood. 6,000 people were told to leave. Ellenton had been a functioning community since the 1870s, named for Mary Ellen Dunbar, the daughter of the man who donated the land. It had been the first town in South Carolina with an automatic telephone dialing system. It had survived the Great Depression. It had doctors, a school, a church, stores, a dairy, a gas station, the ordinary, irreplaceable infrastructure of a community where everybody knew everybody. The government paid $19 million for the entire property. Later accounting revealed that the timber in the structures alone was worth $28 million. Black farmers and sharecroppers, who made up a significant portion of Ellenton's population, received the least. Some were paid as little as $10 per acre. 6,000 graves were exhumed from area cemeteries and relocated. The buildings were demolished by the hundreds. The streets were erased. By April 1, 1952, the last Ellenton resident was gone. Someone posted a handmade sign at the edge of town in December 1950, written in shoe polish on the town's road marker. It's hard to understand why our town must be destroyed to make a bomb that will destroy someone else's town that they love as much as we love ours. But we feel that they picked not just the best spot in the U.S., but in the world. We love these dear hearts and gentle people who live in our hometown. A family called the Johnson Family Singers recorded a song called The Death of Ellenton in 1951. It ends like this: Ellenton, Ellenton is gone forevermore. Today, the Savannah River site sits on that 300 square miles. It is one of the most contaminated nuclear sites in the United States, containing more high-level radioactive waste than anywhere else on Earth. Department of Energy tours are occasionally available. A historical marker on Highway 125 reads, Site of Ellenton. There is no town. There is a road, and somewhere under the nuclear facility that replaced it, there are the foundations of a community that was told its sacrifice was necessary and was never fully compensated for what it lost. The hydrogen bomb plant that Ellenton was destroyed to build produced weapons that were never used. The town that was sacrificed for it is gone forevermore. 9 places. A colonial trading town abandoned after a war. 2 towns drowned in man-made lakes. A racist utopian farm experiment that collapsed under its own contradictions. A mountain town erased by a city's thirst. A plantation battlefield where a widow handed soldiers the tools to burn her own house. The first self-governing free town in American history, forgotten on a Gulf resort island. And a farming community sacrificed to the Cold War. Destroyed not by nature, not by poverty, not by the railroad passing it by, but by its own government, for a bomb that was never dropped on anyone. South Carolina doesn't look like a state that hides things. It looks like sun and water and Spanish moss and history you can see from the highway. But the hiding runs deep here. It runs all the way back to 1697, and it goes all the way forward to a nuclear facility sitting on the graves of people who never got to say goodbye to their town. If this video made you see South Carolina differently, share it with someone who needs to see it. Drop a comment and tell us which of these places you'd most want to visit. We'll see you in the next one.